If you walk through Echo Park today, you're gonna see a neighborhood that looks like a Pinterest board came to life. There's trendy vegan cafes, boutique shops, murals of butterflies and peace signs, and more people walking French bulldogs than you'd ever expect in a historically working-class area. But behind all that hipster charm is a past the city doesn't talk about much. Not too long ago, Echo Park was known less for its iced lavender lattes and more for its body count. It was the kind of place where people disappeared, deals went down in daylight, and everybody knew the cops didn't always play by the rules. This wasn't just a bad part of town. It was a microcosm of everything corrupt, broken, and buried in Los Angeles. For decades, gangs ran the streets, drugs poured in like water, and the people in charge looked the other way, or worse, took their cut. You'd never guess it now, but Echo Park's past is more noir than Netflix. Back in the 70s and 80s, Echo Park became one of LA's most notorious hotspots for gang activity. And this wasn't just some fringe problem, it was woven into daily life. The Echo Park Locos, one of the most feared gangs in the area, had their own corner of the city locked down. They weren't a big national name like the Bloods or Crips, but they held serious weight locally. These were guys who enforced their rule with intimidation, extortion, and brutal violence. They collected taxes from street vendors, threatened business owners, and ran protection rackets that made some neighborhoods feel like occupied zones. And the scariest part? Most people who lived there didn't feel like they had any choice but to accept it. If you called the cops, you might find your car torched or worse. The community was stuck, squeezed between criminals on one side and an unreliable justice system on the other. And then there was the drug trade, which didn't just pass through Echo Park, it set up shop there. Dealers worked corners in broad daylight, stash houses hid behind family businesses, and entire blocks were unofficial open-air pharmacies. Cocaine and heroin were king, but meth made a strong push in the 90s, turning users into hollow shells and fueling more violent crime. Echo Park had become a major distribution point because of its geography, tucked just far enough from downtown to stay off the radar, but close enough to move product quickly. And here's where things get even darker. Many of these operations were allowed to continue because the people running them had protection, not from other gangs, from law enforcement. Corruption was so embedded in parts of the LAPD that some officers were literally on drug dealer payrolls. These weren't rogue bad apples. It was systemic, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. When it came to policing, Echo Park was stuck in this weird paradox. You had some areas that were totally ignored, where people could scream for help and no squad car would show up for hours. Then you had these big, showy busts, usually right before elections or after a scandal hit the news. Cops would come in with helicopters and SWAT, make a bunch of high-profile arrests, and then disappear again. But none of it actually changed the power structure in the neighborhood. In fact, a lot of those crackdowns only strengthened the gangs. They took out low-level guys who were easy to replace and made it look like something was being done. Meanwhile, the real players, the ones with connections, money, and leverage, kept running things from behind closed doors. And every time someone tried to blow the whistle, the evidence just vanished. Literally, files disappeared. Money was misplaced. Cases quietly fell apart. It was like someone didn't want Echo Park cleaned up, at least not yet. That cleanup finally started in the late 90s and early 2000s, but it came with its own kind of violence. This time, the weapons weren't guns. They were eviction notices, condo developments, and rent hikes. Politicians and developers saw dollar signs in Echo Park's location and potential. They launched something they called revitalization, which meant gentrification with a fresh coat of PR. Suddenly, police presence skyrocketed, but not to protect the old residents. It was there to make the area feel safe for new money. Legacy stores shut down, murals were whitewashed, rent went through the roof, and families who had lived there for generations were forced out. It was like a slow erasure of the neighborhood's past, both its people and its history. Crime didn't vanish, it just moved east into places like El Sereno and Boyle Heights. But on paper, Echo Park was fixed, all while pretending like the decades of violence, corruption, and fear had never happened. But if you know where to look, the scars are still there. Some of the original gang graffiti is still faintly visible under layers of new paint. A few old-timers, the kind who remember when the lake was full of bodies instead of paddle boats, still tell stories if you ask the right questions. And some of those networks, the ones that made the neighborhood dangerous in the first place, they never really left. They just adapted, got smarter, moved online, found new fronts. The difference now is that most people walking through Echo Park have no clue. They think they're in a trendy part of town with history and character. But the real history, the stuff they don't put on murals or tourist brochures, that's what the city buried, or at least tried to. So yeah, Echo Park might look cute now, but underneath the latte foam and thrift shops is a history soaked in blood, fear, and silence. The streets don't forget. They never do.